So on the 1st of January of 2023, so this year, it'll be a few days before this video goes out. It marked 5 years since I turned vegan, so half a decade, which is just madness to think about. So I really wanted to just celebrate that by creating a design, and in particular I'm going to be creating a poster today. So I'm going to be using Illustrator predominantly to make the poster, and then I'm going to bring that into Photoshop to texture it a little bit. So yeah, super excited for this one. Let's kick off the year right, and let's get right into this video. So I've got a rough idea of the layout of the poster because I did a couple of sketches in Procreate beforehand. Now one thing I have decided on though is the font family I'm going to be using. So I'm going to be using Espiritu, which I used in my last video. And yeah, I'm just loving it at the minute. I think it's a great font family. So if you've got Adobe fonts, I'd highly recommend you go over there right now and install it. So the thing with it is that the downside of the font family is also the upside. So by that I mean that you can't change the weight of the fonts because they come in styles rather than like the same font with weightier or lighter versions. But obviously the upside is that you can pair different styles together. So that's the idea that I'm going for. Now you can manually change the weight of any font in Illustrator by using offset path, but I feel like any too significant of a change can result in the font losing clarity or can lose a lot of character, so you got to be quite careful with it. So after having a little play around with the type, I'm really liking the synergy between the regular and script variations. I wanted to differentiate the word veganism from the other words, just to give it some contrast. So I'm going to designate the script font for that. Now sometimes cool little things like this line up, so I like the way that the I in veganism fills that little space between the years and of. And another tip that you may not know is to have a gander at the glyphs panel of any font that you're using, especially with a font style like a script, because you may find some cool glyphs in there like swashes or accents that just add a bit of extra spice to your work. Of course you can do this yourself, but they're there to use and it saves you a bunch of time. So I'm just adding the time frame now, which I'm going to sit at the bottom of this poster. It's just going to give it a bit more context. So the idea that I have is to add like an open book, which will symbolize like a journal, if you will. Then I can add some sort of like general observations and thoughts over these past 5 years, sort of a memoir, if you will. So I had a bit of trouble here when trying to join the points on this corner. So I knew that the anchor points weren't lining up, so rather than struggle and trying to select one of the points, you can actually go into outline mode. So you can zoom right in and align them this way. So you just need to press Command Y to enter and exit this view. Don't you just love it when Illustrator crashes? So even though I hadn't saved this document, Illustrator usually recovers it, to be fair to Adobe. But the one thing that I have changed just to avoid losing work at all is to save my files to the cloud. So if you're on a Creative Cloud subscription, then you should be on, I think it's 100 gigabytes of storage. That's what I'm on, and I'm on just a standard Creative Cloud package, just a normal one for every app. So you've got 100 gigabytes of storage, so use it. So moving on, to add a bit more detail and interest to the journal, I've added these lines in the middle. And to really drive home the journal concept, I'm going to add a dotted pattern to the pages just to replicate the dotted paper you find in a lot of journals these days. So it looks a bit weird as it was, so I needed to adjust it to follow the curve of the paper. And in order to do this, I added a warp effect by going to Object, Envelope Distort, and then Distort with Warp. So now to fill the pages, I don't want to overwhelm it, so on the left page I'm going to add some general thoughts and just things that popped up in my mind whilst I was sort of preparing to make the poster, and I'm going to put them in a nice and neat and bulleted line. So if you're wondering how I got the curve on the text, then all I did was just make a curved line with the pen tool that just matched the top line of the book, and then just use the Type and Path tool to add in the text. So for the right page, I'm going to add a big headline that is just going to read "Here's to the next 5 years." And again, I've added the same warp curve to follow everything else. So I've got this big gap next to the text. So to add a bit more detail to the journal itself, I'm going to add a shape and then add some lines to mimic pages. Now I think this nicely aligns to the idea of sort of turning the page, especially now that we're at the start of a new year. So now the exciting bit, some colour. So I'm going to cycle through some colour orders on the Recolor Artwork tool. So I'm going to use my own brand colours just as a personal touch. So I think we're nearly there now, but it's still feeling a bit too flat for me. So to help with the depth and hierarchy of the design, I'm going to add like a 3D sort of effect to the title at the top. So I think that definitely improves the poster and I'm quite happy with it now. So I could add more elements and stuff to fill the gaps on the page, but I just really like the way it is, so I'm going to leave it. So heading on over to Photoshop now to add some texture. Now one of my favourite textures at the moment that I own is the gouache paper texture by Retro Supply. And I think a paper texture is quite fitting, especially for this design, just because of the journal and the vintage feel of the type. So I've set the colour overlay in the blend setting to the off-white colour that's in the background of the design itself. And I just need to set the blending mode now to multiply, which is going to allow the other colours to come up through and just to leave the texture. This is looking lovely now with the texture, but as you can see, the edges of the text are still really clean. So fortunately, there is a really cool way of embedding texture into the design rather than it being sort of like placed on top via a layer. So to do this, you need to go to Filter, Distort, and then Displace. So these settings are fine, just click OK, and then you just need to select a texture file you want to use. However, it's got to be a Photoshop file, so if you've got a texture file that's a JPEG, for example, just bring it into Photoshop and save it out as a Photoshop file. So not only have we used that texture to blend it into the design as a base, but we've also now got a texture embedded into each element. And this is a really great way of making your texturing a bit more realistic and a bit more cohesive. So here is the finished design. I'm super happy with how it turned out, especially as it was a bit more of a personal piece. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if there's any specific content that you guys want to see by dropping a comment down below. I'm sending you all positive vibes for 2023, and I will see you guys in the next one.